And we're back for another episode of the Conscious Queries podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Persicino. Dom Persicino is my hashtag for all the social media, so that's where you can find me. We have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and new Patreon episodes coming out every week for the patrons. So today we have a very special episode. We have somebody across the Atlantic, our very good friend, Jamal Abbas. He's over there studying his law degree or his law profession. So here we are. He's going to be talking to us about some politics. He's going to be chatting to us about the state of North American politics and the what's going on in that realm. So welcome, Jamal. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dom. Nice to connect again.
Right.
Last time we did it, we had some technical issues. It's kind of ironic. We're having less technical issues when I'm much farther away than the last time.
Right, exactly. But you know what? At the same time, given that this has become the new norm, we've had to learn Zoom, and all these interfacing
Oh
technical
yeah,
things. So it ends up working out well now. So hopefully we don't run into any issues. But fingers crossed. Knocking on wood.
yeah.
So I guess we can just start right off into a little bit of. Well, let's start with a bit about you because since the last episode never aired because we had difficulties, let's hear a bit about your background and what got you interested in politics. How does a farm boy from rural Manitoba become he's going to soon to be a lawyer, and a political savant. So how'd this happen?
Well, I mean, as with a lot of things, I don't think you really plan for these things to happen. You find a niche or something or a person that gets you interested or involved, and then sometimes it takes off like wildfire. And I mean, I'm not as involved now because I'm back in school,
Right.
and as you said, not in not in Canada anymore, right now, anyways. But no, it started off at I'd say a fairly young age. Obviously, like a lot of people when they enter university or slightly before that, I followed it quite a bit in high school. I mean, not understanding a lot of it, but finding it interesting. I mean, most of my weeknight evenings, I'd be watching the National with my parents, and that was sort of a routine that I quite enjoyed. So, um, it was a gradual progression, but it did take off pretty fast. Being involved in leadership elections, being involved in civic elections, running myself at a pretty young age. Very, very much a greenhorn at the time, but learned a lot, and I think ran a pretty good campaign for someone that at the time was spent the majority of his campaign at the age of 23 and finished it off at the age of 24. So um, I'm quite proud of the involvement. But outside of that, outside of any partisan involvement, I mean, every day you interact with politics. So um, whether it was on the farm, I mean, that was some of my first actual political exposures. Watching, my parents and neighbors struggle with BSE, or as it was more commonly known, mad cow disease. I mean, it wasn't a strictly political thing, but there was a time where even the farmers in rural Manitoba and rural Canada were very much actively involved in seeking efforts from the respective provincial and, of course, federal government in relief. So politics has always been around me, and I've always tried to follow it. And every job that I've had off the farm has been political. I worked at City Hall for some time, worked at the legislature briefly, and then before I left Canada, worked as a political analyst for Peguis First Nation, which was some pretty interesting work, and I got to look at everything with a pretty objective lens. So I saw the I could say that I've seen a good chunk of the good, the bad, and the ugly in politics and in Manitoba and slightly beyond.
That's really good realization when, you know, when you're young and you have all these ideals, and you know, you get into the real world, you get real life experience, and it sometimes it can be pretty daunting, and you know, a lot of times maybe even disappointing to see, you know, the world not you know, realize in the ways that we used to or we'd want to see. So, you know, yeah, that's a good point you bring up.
Yeah, and I mean it's now I'd say more than ever there's a need for people to follow what's going on. There's a lot of misinformation out there, or half truths, or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of busy spin doctors out there that might not be breaking the rules, but are very good at bending them. So,
Well, that's
you
the thing
know,
when you get with you know, ideologies. There's no you know, sound rhetoric, or there's no, you know, good arguments or proof that you can give them that will change their opinion. They're set in their camp, and you know, sometimes even if they know they're wrong, they will you know, not give in for out of principle for some
well,
weird reason.
I would argue that there's two sides of that. I mean, on one hand, you'll always have the partisans that wear the hard hat, and their party or their political man or woman can do no wrong in their eyes.
Right.
But then you also have people that see past the rhetoric, that are frustrated with it, that just kind of want government and politicians and people in these cham- elected chambers to actually get something done. So people will break away. I mean, we see it in various election cycles. I don't know uh, if it happens at a great exponential rate every time, but it does happen. People do abandon parties and politicians when they get sick of them. Donald Trump, for example. I mean, it wasn't the most decisive drop off for him, but it's pretty rare for a president to not serve two terms, and especially for a Republican president. And I realize that we're hearing it from every political commentator and veteran campaign organizer or anyone plugged in to American politics, that there's not a lot to celebrate, in the sense that it took quite a while to realize who was the eventual winner. But it still is a victory, because I think a lot of people, and including myself, you know, I thought Donald Trump may have very well have squeaked into a second mandate, but I think, you know, it might not have been a lot of people as much as we would have liked to see, but enough people rejected Donald Trump to get out and vote and mail in ballots and show up and make a statement. And there was also a great many of people that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 that chose not to this election cycle. So there is a way to break the rhetoric. And I mean, in the case of the United States, it was because they had a very abrasive president. And I think a lot of people just kind of snapped and said, we're not voting for that. Not this time.
It was a little too much to, you know, it was all fine and dandy to be, you know, uh, make America first for the Americans and all that. But when they got to, you know, climate change, what's that? It's we're like, wait a minute, you know, what's his
Well, the
deal?
most pressing is the way the Trump administration treated COVID-19. I mean, this is what we're living in. I mean, we talked about Zoom earlier as a way of conducting everyday business, basically, in terms of communication. Um, that government, that administration, looked at this global pandemic as a hoax, and then played hot potato with it, trying to blame another country instead of dealing with the people in its own country. So, you know, this government has they're still there. They have a great deal of like you said, you know, it's sort of like disrespect, contempt for facts, for science, for you know, evidence that is right in front of them. And it caught up to them too. I think Donald Trump probably could have done better, potentially even won the election had they maybe spent some time addressing some of these things. That it doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum, you're living through it. So the fact that Trump, very in a very lackluster way, addressed the pandemic that we're currently living in, I think that hurt him
And
because
instead of going
oh yes.
unpolitical, which is, I think, a lot of reasons people voted for him because he was an outsider and they wanted something different than the status quo and what the Hillary Clinton was proposing, being the same old, administration. So he was the outsider, and instead of being, apolitical, he doubled down and went even more political and became even more divisive instead of being you know instead of going in the direction of saying, well, let's not start with the Democrats and Republicans and let's be like bring Americans together. Instead he went, screw anyone who's not with me, right? Just like kind of like that kind of attitude, right? So it didn't help. It definitely doesn't help.
No, and I mean, the thing is, a lot of what Donald Trump did and continues to do, and likely will remain doing after February of 2021, is he's very good at creating divisions. He's very good at getting people riled up, and he's very good at keeping that fire burning. But there also comes a point in time too, which is why I think he lost the election. I mean, I've asked friends of mine in Canada, but lots in the states. Has Donald Trump and the Trump administration, have they had 1 week where they have not, in some way, shape, or form, dominated the news? Have they had a week of peace? Have they really brought? Have they restored anything to America to make it great again, or whatever bullshit rhetoric they were pushing? I mean, what they created was chaos, and they never slowed down. They doubled down on it.
Right. He
So
he didn't
you
want
reap
to
what
fix the
you sow.
establishment. He wanted to throw a wrench in it.
Yeah, he used good clickbait terms to get people excited, to get people thinking that he was gonna drain the swamp and all that. And I mean, I get it. When you can discredit the establishment, as you say, and present yourself as an outsider, despite being part of that very niche bracket of super wealthy people, that's a skill, sure. But what did Donald Trump do with it? I mean, I don't think he had much going for him to begin with. I mean, it was kind of entertaining watching the Republican primaries, but then when he got elected, it was like, holy shit, this guy is going to
Right.
be running for the top job
Right.
uh, in one of the most watched nations in the world. So he got there, and what did he do? I mean, what did he really do to change it? He made it worse. And I think what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are inheriting now is, if it was broken before, it is much more broken now. So they have a lot of work to do, and I mean, I really hope that they can address some of the things that Donald Trump has made. He made a lot of mountains out of molehills and created a lot of divisive rhetoric in that country. And I mean, we could laugh about the silly things that he says. Not even silly. Some of it is just downright awful. We can poke fun at his inability to lead, or his shortcomings as a leader. But the reality is, he left a trail of destruction in that country. And now, the Democrats have to clean it up. And are they up to the task? It remains to be seen. I mean, there's a lot of energy coming out of the Democrats' campaign and everything, and it's a win, and it's a very good and relieved win. But the work is monumentous, and it's
Well,
almost exclusively because of Donald Trump.
see, this is the problem I have. It seems to me that a lot of people think that it's always there's always the new guy that's, less awful than the old guy. And he's going to come in and save everyone, and he's going to come in and be good-willed. And realistically, I see the Democratic Party just as the same old establishment where, they're not going to, go into that extreme progressive where that's what they campaigned on, and they promised a whole bunch of policies. I don't think that's really going to happen. They're, just like they used, the progressive votes to get elected. Now that they got elected, they're going to look back at all those young people, and they're going to say thanks for the votes, and now we're going to go back to corporate America. And it's, this is the fallacy of the, communities and the people thinking that these parties, both the Democrats and the Republicans, are there with their best interest for the people. And I'm sincerely, I believe that they're both systemically bought out or influenced so heavily by lobbyists that they're completely controlled by the corporations. And realistically, they're both playing for the same game. Unlike Donald Trump. Donald Trump, realistically, he wouldn't pick up phone calls from lobbyists, and that would become a problem. And then it turns out everyone around it became a lobbyist because companies would pay people millions of dollars just to, get information to Donald Trump because he's the president and his policies matter. But then again, here we go back to partisan politics, right? We go into how, the Senate was controlled by the Senate, or the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, the House by the Democrats. So there's, there's no policies that can go through. There's only constant filibustering under Trump and under Obama, which is why Obama was given, 2 years, and he was given the chance to do some policy. Yet after that, he was completely blocked off from doing anything. Same thing with Trump with his elections, right? He lost. He never really had the House, so how could he have ever even passed any legislation, right? So
Well, that's
is
not
the
true. I mean, like I understand, the devolution of power doesn't give the president total control. There's a divvying up of the powers in those chambers, but Donald Trump absolutely had the opportunity to be a broker for change if he really wanted to. So if votes in one chamber is dominated by Democrats, the Democrats are not just going to always vote no from something that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. That's not how it works. I mean, the reality is
well,
there's
that's
there's
Nancy
compromise that has
Pelosi's
to be
position
involved.
most of the time,
But the reality is Donald Trump never compromised on anything, which is
right?
why there was these epic battles between him and Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it existed not because the Democrats thrived on the theatrics. I mean, they were fighting for bills to pass. They were fighting for changes to happen that Donald Trump could have been at the forefront doing it, but chose to do the opposite.
Right.
So I don't necessarily agree with that because change is always possible if you're willing to work with your opponents. I
Right.
mean, we see it in many other governments. We've seen it here in Canada. I mean, and it has happened in the United States. It's not that it hasn't, but under this last government, that should not be. It definitely makes things harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. That's otherwise then it's not democracy, and it still is fundamentally a liberal democracy in the United States. And Donald Trump chose to run it like within his bubble, like not not taking into account the other voices that were there because they
He's
were
essentially
Democrats
running
or
it
they
like
weren't Republicans.
Putin's
He even
Russia.
attacked his own party. He even attacked his own party.
Yeah.
People that are currently elected. I mean, anyone that said anything to try and be a voice of reason, Donald Trump went after. He has a shallow ego, and that's his problem. He could not actually defend himself without trying to take down another person. And
Right.
I mean, the fact that this president could not work with his members opposite, it shows poor leadership. I make no apologies in saying that because we've watched it for 4 years.
Right.
We've watched it while people have died in the streets. We've watched it during a pandemic where he called it the China virus and just basically let everyone be as they are. Had his own supporters show up to rallies and sign agreements that, hey, if I get sick, I'm not going to sue you, but we're all going to jam pack like sardines in a can and cheer you on. That's
Right.
ridiculous. How irresponsible of a president.
Right. It's it's a big problem, the way he handled himself, and it's, the unpresidentialness of his demeanor kind of, it affected a lot of things, and it affected America. How was Canada's reaction? How did they react to the virus? How was their you know
Well, if you're asking me how I think Canada is responding to it, I mean, like, I think I don't think everyone is reaching the benefits of programs the same as others. There are people disenfranchised. Absolutely, there are. Um, but we're handling it much better than our neighbors to the south. I think generally speaking, we're doing a good job. I think there are certain things that I've seen, especially in Manitoba. We see it in Alberta as well, where cases are high, and you have health ministers that maybe aren't quite qualified for the job or not up to the job. But generally speaking, we've seen. I think we've had a pretty good response. It's we've had a pretty good response in terms of government response, but it has not deterred or lowered the amount of cases in Canada. So not to any exponential rate. So that is alarming. I mean, it's still a very, very happening situation. COVID is definitely here. COVID is definitely in its second wave. Here in Scotland, we're in tier 3 lockdown. So I mean, I can't leave the city that I'm in. I can't cross the bridge or anything like that, and everything closes pretty darn early here. But it's a matter of people following it.
right.
Are people following the rules? That's one thing. Um, but I'm kind of going off a bit here, but I am worried because right before I left Manitoba, cases were beginning to increase, and then by the time I got to Scotland, they just shot right up. And Minister Friesen has had a really poor response to healthcare professionals, and has shown a very you know strong lack of ability to understand the situation. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but I think he made comments along the lines of some anti-maskers that were protesting, or I forget exactly the nature of it, but he had said they made some very valid points or some very good points. So to hear a health minister say that in one of the hardest hit provinces is extremely upsetting. To hear the negative comments that him and his cabinet colleagues have made about healthcare professionals, specifically doctors, very upsetting. So generally, yeah, we're dealing with COVID as well as we can. I think Canadians we're really pulling together, and we're doing what we can. But when I look to the government side of things, I think some efforts could be done a little bit better, or at least an acceptance of the facts of our reality could be handled much better.
Right. It's I find it problematic when, you know, it's 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 very convenient, and it's very difficult when it becomes a provincial and federal issue, and it becomes the hot potato to throw around and say whose policies are enacted, and at what level do we take action, right?
Well, we don't even have that issue in Manitoba. We just have a health minister that doesn't understand how hospitals work, doesn't understand how uh, how how much we rely on doctors. I mean,
They've been cutting in
it's
healthcare as opposed to increasing in,
well. I mean, the thing is, we could talk about the dollars and cents and the fiduciary responsibility that exists between the federal government and the province. that's something that will be battled regardless of who's in provincial or federal office. But we're living through something that most of us haven't lived through before, and that's a global pandemic. So first thing that comes to mind is healthcare. I mean, we are all feeling the pinch financially, some more than others, and I in no way would discredit you know uh, a small business owner's experience, or or someone that had lost their job and their job no longer exists.
Right. The
Brass
shutdown.
tacks is we got to try stay alive, and you know as people, we're doing what we can. We have our masks with us. We're doing our Zoom meetings.
Right.
We're doing our shopping in the hours that our shops are open, which are reduced. So I think generally people are doing okay for the most part.
We're trying to reduce the risks everywhere. What do you
Yeah,
think?
we're doing our part. We're following the rules generally. I mean, of course, you have a few idiots out there that think that masks don't do anything and they're causing more harm than good. But when we have again a government that legitimizes people that are protesting
That
the
make it a freedom issue, right? It becomes a problem. Yeah.
it's a bit sickening. So I expected better out of our provincial government, which in lots of ways they show compassion as individuals, but as a government they don't show it. And I
Right.
know a lot of the people that serve in the PC government, and I know a lot of people that work for the PC party in Manitoba and are very nice, thoughtful people, but what they do in government and who they are as people are seemingly very different things. So watching that unfold is very upsetting, even all the way here in Scotland. It's actually more upsetting because I'm of course worried about family and friends that are there, that
That are affected.
are kind of scratching their heads like me, going, "What the hell is our government doing when they're doing nothing?"
Right. They go back and forth of, you know, we're open for business. We want people to come travel to Manitoba to all non-essential businesses have to shut down for another 2 weeks now, and this is it's affecting me. It's affecting so many people. What do you think about the WHO's position now that they are against the economic shutdown, and they say that it is actually more detrimental, and there's going to be over 200,000 people in starvation around the world caused by the inactivity of economics. So they're basically saying that the shutdown is actually more damaging than the virus. What do you think about that?
Well, I didn't actually see that or hear that from the WHO, but if that's what they had said, I mean, I would think that the the key would be to make sure that businesses are not opened like they were before COVID, that we're following certain regulations, that we're sanitizing our hands, that we're wearing masks, that we're socially distant, that we're, having whatever it is, plexiglass between tables at restaurants, things like that. Obviously, the economic pinch that we're all feeling is a very real one. I don't try to poise myself as being smarter than the professionals that are making recommendations. But I would assume that within those recommendations,
They still
it's
recommend the masks and the
of
social
course. So,
distancing and
I
all,
mean,
obviously.
there are a lot of businesses that have adapted. There are some that can't. Some will take longer. We've also seen a ton of businesses completely close up, which is
Well, think of,
devastating.
restaurants can stay open because it's, people need to eat. And this is the funny part, alcohol, cannabis stores, they're still open because it's essential for people to have their substances. Yet, we're seeing gyms shut down, and we're seeing, workout and sports places, complexes being shut down because, we can't do sports in the COVID age. There's no contact sport. There's no anything that can really go on, and that's really affecting those kinds of businesses. And it's really
Not if you're in Ontario. Apparently, dance studios can
right.
be open in Ontario.
Right.
So
That's kind of strange where, some there's like kind of things that don't match up, right? Like, daycares can be open, but gymnastic centers can't be open, right? But it's it's like what really kind of differentiates one essential business from the other, or what is exactly
Well,
are
I
those
think it comes
regulations
down
for?
to what's the framework of assessing vulnerability of the people that are going to these things. Whether it's a dance studio, whether it is your favorite watering hole, um, or a coffee shop, or a daycare. I mean, is there a framework that exists? Is there something there that actually assesses the risk of contracting COVID? I mean, that's part of it. But again, watching the great many of businesses that have existed in Toronto, for example, some for over 35, 40 years, close because these businesses can't afford to either pay the rent or can't afford to just keep the lights on because COVID came and cut them right down. How do you how do you address that? How do you how do you say, well, that's just part of part of what we're living through? I mean, it's hard. It is hard.
And this
Uh,
is really something that goes with the global economic, the interconnectedness of the global economy, where one thing that happens somewhere affects the price of goods, and it affects places all over the world. So we're at a point now that you can't even be an isolationist country. You have to work with the globe and work with other nations, because it it affects one problem, and one crisis can affect us all around the world, which was not a problem before. There we had this entire interconnected world, yet now we've noticed that it has become a problem, and so global governance is kind of trying to address that in a real way. But man, is it ever an uphill battle, and is ever a really difficult and controversial thing to talk about, because there is some room for you know environmentalism, like environmental policy, where we can all agree that emissions are bad and we need to address it, and kind of punish emitters as a global judicial force, right? Enforce policy, like the blue berets that enforce peace. We would hope. We would hope, and more than just on paper, we want to see a global governance that actually implements real action.
yeah, and I think a big part of it is determining what the biggest issues are, or the biggest issue at a global scale. And one nation or group might argue world peace. Another might argue the environment, climate change.
Right.
Another might argue world hunger. I mean, I think the other part of that too, it's not about determining one issue and sticking to it. I shouldn't have framed it like that, but it's determining the major issues. There's not one singular issue. There are a great many issues, but it's determining which issues are most imminent, and working through them collectively. But then it's also having leaders that lead at the world stage. And I think we have a pretty good government that represents us well on the world stage. I think our neighbors, again, to the south, did not have a government that represented their country well on the world stage. They had an administration that rejected the science around climate change. They had an administration that would rather fan the flames of war over peace. And they had an administration that had a narrative that it was bad to send foreign aid to nations that were in despair, whether it was through hunger or devastation from catastrophic events of either nature or war. So, you know, we could talk about how the Democrats have their shortfalls as a party, and we could talk about that and go over a chronology of how They've had ebb and flows of very progressive and centrist people at the helm. But the reality is, we are going to see a very different type of administration than what we were used to with Trump. And when we talk about it in the global context, um, I really do hope that we see progressive change on issues like world hunger, on issues like peace around the world, and action on climate change. I mean, we're not really recognizing how big of an issue those three are, and especially the latter on climate change. It seems to have been. It took a real hard back seat for the last 4 years, and I don't want to sing. You can't single-handedly blame Donald Trump. There are other world leaders that really share the sentiment of his rhetoric, but he fanned the flames extremely hard on that issue. So I'm quite optimistic that we're going to see a change, and the United States has a real opportunity to facilitate some of that change, and I think they will. I'm very confident that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden will be very positive agents of change at the global and domestic level.
So the Paris Climate Agreement, a lot of criticism goes into it, saying it's non-binding. So it's mostly just nice talk. It's a lot of nice, you know, back, saying, "Oh, look how nice we are," and we're taking action. Yet realistically, there is no concise uh, policies that are enforceable. So what exactly is, and Donald Trump left it because it was non-binding. So what exactly is is that enough to have non-binding resolutions, or to have
Well, just
just
because it's
a
not
word,
because
you
it's a
know
non-binding agreement doesn't mean it's ineffective. Having unanimous consent to move forward on recommendations or policy alternatives to what exists, whether it's putting a price on carbon or having a levy for some of the largest corporations that emit some of the most CO2 gases. I mean, these are these are progressive changes. I mean, we I think can agree on that. Um, so if you're saying, should we have an agreement that once you're signed into it, you're unable to leave? Well, I mean, I don't know if that makes an entire difference. At the end of the day, it's going to be the will of the government in any said nation to enact real progressive change on in this case climate change. Um, so how the Biden and Harris administration address again the trail of destruction that Donald Trump left around environmental matters will be very interesting. Um, but I don't think because Trump left, it delegitimizes the agreement because it's a non-binding agreement. I think it's just more of a statement of Donald Trump. He would have, if he would have had to stay in that and do the work for 4 years, we would have seen nothing. He would have done nothing.
right,
So he had this option to bail out. He bailed out. It's a very highly predictable thing that Donald Trump did. It's a very highly predictable thing that most governments that are that far right would do.
right.
So I'm not surprised. And if it was a binding agreement, the Trump administration would have just swept it under the rug as they did with many things. So
They would have,
I think comparing, the nature of the agreement to the Trump administration is not not a true likeness of what we could expect from other leaders.
right. Well, I think we can't put everything on Donald Trump. I think America was broken before he got elected. So, if we look at American politics, it's always been in, murky waters, and it to the point where the open corruption is so blatant that, it's almost silly. It's goofy. Politics in America has become goofy, where the 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 the
Sure, like we can call it goofy though, but and it is in lots of ways. But
and
Donald
no,
Trump,
none of
he
the
did
parties,
perpetuate it.
you
He, he
know,
he had the opportunity.
but the Democrats have been in charge, and they're the ones that have been funding the police for this all the time. So, and it's been fine for them. You know, they've been these governors in New York and California, yet they seem to be fine with the police state. They seem fine with, the amount of incarcerations. This is not just a Republican issue. It's the
No,
Democrats that
it's
believe in
definitely not.
in
It's a shared issue. It's a nonpartisan issue, but it
exactly.
became partisan when Donald Trump told the Proud Boys to stand down and stand by. It became a partisan issue when Donald Trump uh, mocked people protesting about the gun massacres that are happening in schools and in places of worship around the world, and the targeting of women and minorities. It became a politicized issue because of Donald Trump. It existed before Donald Trump. Donald Trump made it an issue that he'll forever be on the wrong side of history for. And I go back to what I said earlier. And you're right to say that it's an issue that didn't just magically appear after Trump got elected, but it's an issue that Donald Trump, just fumbled completely and did so with a smile on his face. That's the problem. Where Donald Trump could have made massive improvements, where he could have showed that, I am a leader. I am different. Black lives do matter.
Right.
The rights of women do matter. But, instead he doubled down. He went against that. He went against some of the first things he said. He mocked a journalist with a physical disability. He said that he was afraid of Muslims, that he thought there were too many mosques in America, or whatever
Right.
bullshit he said. He fanned those flames very early on.
Right.
So the choices that you have when you're sitting in a seat of influence and power, um, you know, it's 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 telling after the fact and then while you're going through it. We watched this shitstorm unfold for 4 years. Lots of people have died in the United States as a result. Protests at an unprecedented rate, and a more divided nation than before Donald Trump ever walked into the Oval Office. So no,
Right.
I disagree. Like, I mean, in the sense that Donald Trump is not squarely to blame, but Donald Trump is responsible for not taking any action on those issues. 100%.
Right. There's
And I also
there's
forgot Mike Pence too, who doesn't believe conversion therapy should be banned, because that's a fucking normal view to have well, at any time, but in the year 2020.
and that's funny because that you mentioned that, because in Canada they're bringing up Bill C8 that's going to be talked about this week about conversion therapy, and the minister wants to amend the criminal code to make it illegal in Canada to force kids into conversion therapy.
Yeah, well, I mean that should have happened many many years ago. It's bizarre that it is still a thing that can happen.
Right.
I mean, like I realize that Canada is not necessarily the model for everything, but because we are slow on a lot of a lot of these things, but this is great.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate it took this long, but at least it's happening here. Whereas in the States, they're still debating the legitimacy of it.
Right.
I mean, there are conservatives, I'm sure, that not just conservatives, but people that are on that spectrum that may debate for these types of cruel, inhumane, and bizarre, weird practices. But I think a rational thinking person would probably say the same, where it's like, this doesn't do anything. This is very bad and emotionally and physically damaging for a human being to go through.
And I
So
mean, it came out recently. The Pope, even the Pope came out supporting civil unions for gay couples. So, it's we're at the point now that even The religious sanctioned order is saying, yeah, so sexuality, do what you want, right? We're becoming, even the church now is accepting that as a, the reality of life, that not everybody's straight,
Reality
it's
of
just
life, it
fact of
existed
life.
forever.
Huh?
It existed forever. Finally,
Exactly, exactly.
people realized, like, holy shit, a guy in his early 20s is hanging himself in his dorm room because he's persecuted by his peers over his sexuality. Like, that's fucked up.
It is.
That's not right.
Right.
So, religious leaders coming out and making those comments are the right thing to do.
Yeah.
uh, and it should have been happening a long time ago, because some of the things that have happened in any kind of home or outside the home in religious communities, where men and women identify as something other than straight, what they've had to deal with as a result is well, nothing short of just being absolutely heartbreaking and pretty bad. So again, like, on that issue of conversion therapy, I'm happy that it's going to be
Finally
removed.
addressed, right?
I'm curious to see if there's any what opposing arguments exist. I could kind of think in my head some of the elected people that may have something to say, but I think it's a pretty small minority. You know,
Probably something about religious freedoms, but I don't think that's going to stick.
no, no.
But see, this is the whole. I guess this is going to be a bit of a controversial issue, but let's look at religious, doctrines, and kind of, the extremism that, you know sometimes people are extremists, and they use either the ideology of a book, or they use a religion to justify their actions, right? They said, this book told me to do it, God told me to do it, or whatever kind of thing like that. And then, you know you have to have the official church, or the author of the book, come out and say, we condemn this, we're not in favor of violence, and all that, right? But then, what happens when there are sects of religious organizations that are, they don't condemn, they openly call for war and violence. And so how do we deal with extremism like that? How do we deal with old religions and groups like that still, don't believe in women's rights, or they don't believe that women should be educated, which, is, to me, I find that, irreprehensible. To me, there's no justification for that, right? There's no, oh, it's a religious right to not let your wife get an education. There's no justifying that for me. So, to where do we go from here with religious extremism, or any kind of ideological extremism on any end, right?
Well, I mean, it's look. I think what it comes down to is making sure that a country, for example, I'll use Canada as an example, that a country has laws in place to protect individual freedom, that has channels in place to protect people that are vulnerable. Um, I don't have much to say about different faiths. People are allowed to practice whatever they don't want to practice. Um, but what has happened over the years is people have used books and scriptures to legitimize things, and it's unfortunate. And it's very, it's not something that I think I think those religious scripts actually prescribed. I think people take things out of context and legitimize it because they say it's in the name of whatever they're quoting.
Right.
So, if you're asking how to deter that, well, I think having good social infrastructure, good outreach, making sure that, if this is a young person going to high school, that they have uh, adequate resources in their primary education outside of the home, if they're experiencing any kind of abuse or oppression or sexism in the home, that they have an outlet, and that outlet can remove them from a bad environment.
Right.
But outside of that, I mean, it's hard, right? Because there are we've seen examples of these types of extremism in not just in other parts of the world. We've seen it in Canada. We've seen families and young people, the recipients of sometimes some very fatal outcomes. Um, but do I think that's a result of something that's prescribed exactly through religious text? No, I think it's a symbol of oppression within one's own family or home or whatever, and they use that as an excuse. They use that as a system to legitimize abuse. So it's ensuring that we recognize that it does exist, and that the right infrastructure is in place outside the home that's accessible for someone experiencing that.
Right. That's a good point. That's really good information you just gave out there. It's it's a really big issue, and I think more information is just the only way forward. Is if yeah, as you were saying, if we interconnect our society more, that we can keep account for each other, and keep each other safe as a community. That's the thing where we can't just be depressed and think that we're alone, and that we're stuck in our situation. There's always people out there that are more than willing to help us, that love us, and that applies for everyone. So there's no you know there's always love, so you don't have any reason not to you know accept that love, right, into your life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess we can go a bit more into like the American politics. We talked a lot about that. Is there something that you want to add?
Well, I mean, outside of just waiting and seeing what's going to happen in the next few months, once Biden and Harris take over the White House, I'm excited. I'm optimistic about it. But I'm also hoping that which they cited that as a priority. They address COVID-19 a little bit more hands on than this current president and administration has. Um, but I'm curious to see what happens to Donald Trump after he's removed from the White House. If he's going to go quietly or not, doesn't sound like he is. I don't know
He'll
what leg he
probably
has to
tweet from
stand on.
Mar-a-Lago. He'll be tweeting from Mar-a-Lago.
So
He'll be a
I
fun
mean,
post president, I think. He'll go on E Talk. He'll do all the interviews. Maybe Hollywood will embrace him again.
I highly doubt that. I mean, it's possible actually, but like you even look at like someone like Richard Nixon,
Right.
who did not have the most graceful exit from the Oval Office. But even Nixon, still was a respected person amongst his colleagues within the GOP, and on
Right.
the other side, and in the Democrat on the Democrat side, and there's a difference. Like,
Well,
will
now you
Donald
have the
Trump
nostalgia
be able to
factor.
have a lighthearted relationship with Joe
It's
Biden's
it's hard to
wife, the
see.
same way that
It's hard to see that.
George Bush and Michelle Obama seem
Right.
to just hit it off very nicely?
Well,
Like,
that's the
no, I
thing.
don't think
Bush,
so. Donald Trump
everybody seems to
alienated
love
himself.
Bush now that we've had Trump. That
Look, the
they look
fact
back at
that we
Bush and
have
they
been
say, yeah, this
able,
guy was
I don't
okay.
know about Dick Cheney necessarily, but the fact that we've been able to look at George Bush as this sort of like, you know,
It wasn't that bad.
delightful old man, and ignore all the horrible things that the Bush administration did for 8 whole, very long years, says a lot about Donald Trump, less about George Bush and more about Donald Trump. This is in 4 years, Donald Trump has left a brand. You know, when you brand something with a hot
A
iron, he's
brand
left
of
a
being
brand on everyone.
obnoxious. Yeah, being very obnoxious and not very good at working with. Yet we
So,
look at Bush and his comments on 9/11, where we thank the first responders and the families, and we hold
Donald
together.
Trump called
And now and
all the
now
war
watch my
veterans. He
watch
called them
my my
losers.
par, and he like goes and golfs, and you're like, oh my god, this guy, what
Yeah,
is
but then you
this?
look at Donald Trump, and was it war veterans or wounded war veterans? I forget who it was he had mentioned. If it was veterans, people that served, anyways, he referred to them as losers.
Right, I think it was mentioned. He was talking about McCain, because he was a prisoner of war, and he considered him a loser
No, there
for
were comments
losing.
about McCain specifically, but there are also
Right.
comments, I think, about actual people that have served, like as a general statement. Anyways, I mean, that's tip of the iceberg for a lot of the shit that Trump has said. So, I mean, I'm curious how, like, how history can history reward someone like Donald Trump? Like, I don't think so. I
Well,
think I
not when
think
you know the media crucifies him at every opportunity. Yet and a lot of times he digs his own grave. That's true.
a lot of times, every time he digs his own grave, every time. I think every time he digs his own grave. I mean, he's alienated himself. I would not say that the media did some sort of hatch job on Donald Trump. He did it to himself, man. Like he had every opportunity to be this, a different type of president, I guess, even though while he was running, there were some pretty awful things that he was saying and things that he had said prior. Um, the media, no, the media was unfairly targeted by Donald Trump and his supporters. I think that, like, are there things in media that you can't just look at and that you shouldn't look at and just take as a through and through fact? Absolutely. But did the media create the demise of Donald Trump? Not at all.
Yet
Like,
it's true that the confidence of mainstream media has plummeted, and a lot of people the doubt what they're saying and the confidence of those journalists. There's barely any journalists left, because they were all saying that it was going to be a Biden landslide, yet it came down to the wire. Again, same thing with Hillary Clinton. They were all saying it was going to be a Clinton landslide, but it wasn't, right? So, the media has a lot to answer for, I think, too.
well, I mean, the media is only reporting the mood of the day. There's and the attitudes that are reflected in the White House and beyond. Um, the media also, certain journalists, the Trump administration put muzzles on them, vilified them, belittled them. Trump himself projected a lot of uh, uh, very, like, negative and quite ignorant views towards certain reporters, and it lasted. I mean, these people did not necessarily recover in the sense that they just bounced right back. I mean, it was damaging. Trump belittled the structural integrity of journalism in America by never once showing like a common ground or trying to work in the sense that just the simple things like answering a goddamn question. So that perpetuated this distrust of the media. But like I said, I mean, any rational person is not just going to listen to everything that's said on the news and then just follow along with it. Um,
You would hope.
but should you look at the media as something that you can't trust? I mean, it depends on what you define as media. Of course, if you're talking about a right-wing news outlet in Alberta, and I called it a news outlet. There you go, and you refer to it as news. I mean, it's not news. It's borderline hate speech. So it depends where you're getting your sources from. And Donald Trump discredited every single media outlet that didn't say that couldn't say a nice thing about him because they were just reporting the news of the day or the turmoil of the day or the disaster of the day.
Right.
So he took it personally and he had a tantrum. He got into a tizzy.
Right. It's, I think a lot of people that were interested in politics have been turned off by politics because of Donald Trump. So it's kind
Yeah,
of been a
well,
downfall for people who might have been inspired by politics before.
I think it goes both ways. I think some people got involved in politics because they rejected Donald Trump's his rhetoric and his damaging policies and stances that he would have on contentious and non-contentious issues. He would, like I said, make mountains out of molehills. So some people got involved. A lot of people, though, you're right, I'm sure felt very exhausted. It's been a long 4 years. I remember when Trump got elected, I was I was at a bar in Edmonton with my cousin, and we were sitting there, and everyone, it was loud, like a typical bar. If we remember what bars were like before COVID, uh, people are laughing and talking. We're all watching the TVs with the election results, and then when it finally became like a thing where Hillary Clinton had won, it was like holy shit, or had won, had lost.
Yeah.
It became a holy shit moment, and then everything went just dead silent. And then from that point forward, well, I think some people thought maybe Trump would be different, but he was different in the opposite way because,
He
shortly
wasn't there
after
for the
that,
little guy. He was there to, save his pocketbook and save him and his friends money. Just like every other corporate elitist who gets into power, they're there to help their friends get tax write-offs. They're not there for the little guy. They're not there for the, for us,
oh,
the public.
no, and I think, I think when politicians when they overextend themselves to try and show that they're a member of the working class or whatever, it's kind of nauseating in a way.
Right.
It's like Doug Ford. He was late in delivering the budget, and I can't remember if I read this right, so I can't be 100% certain on my words, but I'm pretty sure what happened was there's a fine that he incurs as premier of $10,000, which he said he had done intentionally to give back to the province of Ontario, which is obviously, for people that wear the hard hat for Doug Ford would think that's a very noble thing, but 10 grand does not change the money that's been cut to programs for families with autistic children, for the war that Doug Ford has waged against teachers unions and against healthcare workers. But for some people, they'll look at that and say, "Well, he's a good guy. He let go of $10,000."
Right. A guy making, over 350K, you know,
Yeah, and a
just from
guy
his
who's
thing.
worth quite a bit of money. And I mean, even if he was worth nothing, I mean, it's when you look at the policies that matters more than I'm sorry, like I mean,
Gestures
I would love
are,
ten thousand
yeah,
dollars myself, but in in the province of Ontario, $10,000,
gets
you
you
can't
nothing.
really stretch those bucks that far.
Right. What can you buy? You can't even buy a car, let alone anything. So like, yeah, that's a good point you bring up. It's empty gestures are, a lot of the time, you know we that's kind of what the media showcases a lot of the time, right? It's the tokenization of individuals or of groups or policies where we give special attention to for political reasons, and less for the virtuous good reason of trying to save people and help people. More of a, we need these people in our faction to get numbers. And it seems that the electoral process is kind of that mentality that drives into our politicians, where they've become they've just become panderers, and less of, here are my principles, here's where I stand, either you vote for me or you don't. It's more, I'll do anything you ask and I'm going to pander, and kind of that populist's attitude coming from, most of the parties, really.
Yeah, I mean, it it's one of those things, I guess, where we've seen it. It's been perpetuated by people like Donald Trump, and then in Ontario, for example, just talking about Doug Ford, the blue wave that happened there. In some ways, it happened. I mean, the Liberals weren't going to live forever as an incumbent government, and the NDP didn't quite have the stuff to pierce through into the halls of government at Queens Park. But Doug Ford, as a campaigner, is good. Ford Nation or whatever the hell they called themselves for a while there. Him and his late brother Rob. We could talk about their bad politics and their poor attitudes towards people and things like that, but they knew how to campaign, and they also, but in the same breath, knew how to connect with people. And Doug Ford has shown that, not through his policies, but as an individual, relatively personable person that has performed well in a global pandemic, and has also worked well with the federal government, where other conservative governments in Canada have chosen not to. And I think like that style is a preferred style. Not the policies, but the people. Where you look at someone like Jason Kenney, one of the most skilled politicians in Canada. He's had two jobs before his life in politics, where he worked for Liberal MP Ralph Goodale for a time, and then worked for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Maybe there was jobs between that, but I think those are the only two jobs he had. Um, and then was elected. I think he was younger than me when he became an MP, and has always worked in elected politics. This is a guy that was there from the early days of the Conservative Party, before it was a Conservative Party. He's been a part of opposition, he's been a part of government, one of Stephen Harper's most trusted and able ministers, but one of the worst premiers in Alberta. It's really interesting how that works, and Jason Kenney as a premier in a province that was already going through a pretty bad time has shown that he's pretty bad at leading in times of turmoil, in times of pandemic, in times of economic stress. He's at every opportunity tried to lay blame on either Rachel Notley or Justin Trudeau. But he's been in power. He's been the premier of Alberta for enough years now to make a noticeable difference. So he doesn't have that personable personality that Doug Ford has. They both have some pretty regressive policies. I would not call Doug Ford, even though the party is the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, he's very much like what Mike Harris was to Ontario. Um, but he's an approachable person, and I think he saw the forest for the trees during the first wave, especially of this pandemic, and was like, Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau, these are people I have to work with, and I want to work with them.
Right.
Uh, but did that necessarily translate into progressive policies at Queen's Park? No, no, I don't think so. Um, but it's a hell of a lot more than we could say for someone like Jason Kenney. The most disappointing politician in Canada, I think, is Jason Kenney right now. He's been around longer than most, and he's had a very successful career at the federal level, and is a very well liked person in his political circle. But like I said, and I've said it more than once now, probably one of the not probably I think definitely the worst premier that Alberta has seen since probably Ralph Klein. But even I think even Klein wasn't as bad as Kenny.
That's interesting. I don't know enough about Alberta politics to comment, but I lived in Ontario long enough to know a bit about the political parties there, and I remember before Doug Ford got in, under the Liberals, it's it was another scandalous time where with the Hydro Ontario and some of those big key elements key failures from the Wynne government. It gave the voter, the electorate, the irresponsible attitude of when you're in government and you're in a position to write checks, when it's not your money at stake, it's other people's money. You're really irresponsible with it, and you're just willing to make problems go away by just giving money away and fixing problems just with money. And then
I think the Ontario Liberals, I think the Wynne government, what they had was they were an incumbent government. Kathleen Wynne was not the premier during the entire tenure that the Liberal Party of Ontario was in government. Um, so I'm someone that thinks Kathleen Wynne did a pretty good job as premier, but had to weather some pretty unfortunate realities. And of course, the hydro debacle is I think forever going to be a long debated thing, not just with people that may not support Kathleen Wynne, but I think even with Liberals in Ontario. Um, but that's the reality of incumbent governments, man. I mean, they they get phased out. I mean, in Manitoba, we had a 16 plus year NDP government, and I don't think anyone. Well, I mean, I ran in the 2016 election, so I can tell you, as someone who went through that process, like and connected with several thousand voters, not just in one constituency, but I assisted the time fellow candidates in other areas of the province. People did not want the NDP back. They were not happy with a very long sitting government, and the government itself was tired. The government itself had its ministers resign and speak against Premier Selinger. There was a lot of moving parts there.
everybody
Ontario
was
Liberals,
they
it
had
was no
enough,
different.
right?
You
They
know,
had enough. And this is one of the things, right? If you don't bring in new people with new policy and new ideas and actually try to
well, I think it's
prove
just
to
the
the
nature
people
of
that you're
the
actually doing something progressive and you're actually trying to be responsible, as opposed to saying, "Nah, I'm just gonna hold on to my dominion, and I like it the way it is, and so I'm just gonna."
Well,
S-
I think
s-
the NDP, and I think if you talk to the Democrats, they'll tell you that. I think the fortunes of the NDP might have changed, um, or might have been different. Sorry, had Selinger uh,
Resigned before,
left,
yeah.
before and not weathered the election. But at the same time, I mean, it's a pretty predictable
You
pattern
have
that's
to know
happening
when
in
to leave.
Manitoba. We elected a conservative government. They come in as sort of this interlude government. They make massive cuts. They ignore people that are, in lower income brackets, and in other situations that don't necessarily fit their realm of their policies of having the books in the black and operating government like a household, like you'd operate a household, which is again a very a very poor logic to hold, in my opinion. Um, but I think. I think the pattern in Manitoba is pretty much on brand for Manitoba. Um, but again, like in Ontario, just like in Manitoba, there were ministers in the Salinger government that didn't support Salinger. There were former ministers in the Wynne government that resigned, not out of protest, but basically quietly resigned on the eve of the 2018 election and said, "Look, I'm not running for re-election. It's been good. I'm moving on."
Right.
And that's sort of what happened to the Wynne government, and they were left as sort of a shell of their former self going into that election, which very much fueled the flames for the blue wave in Ontario.
Well, at a
So
certain point, you
it's a
have
pretty
to know
natural
where the
progression.
wind is blowing and call it a day, right? Even people like Jean Chrétien, who is beloved by so many people, at a certain point, enough is enough. You've done a decade, you've done over a decade as prime minister, as Jean Chrétien, enough is enough. At a certain point, you have to say, do I want to leave with people yelling and screaming at me and booing me? Or do I want to leave when people are still clapping and saying, "Oh, he's leaving. Oh, that's too bad. We love the guy." You want to leave when you're on still good terms. So you leave earlier than later. I think, as
Yeah,
politicians
look at
go.
when Brian Mulroney left. I mean, he was it was not a great exit for him.
Right.
You know, history has rewarded Brian Mulroney. I mean, as a fairly progressive prime minister, and in a lot of other accolades that have been given to him. But at the exit of his political career, which I think was in '92 or '93, I can't, in the
He
early
lost the
'90s, anyways. I'm,
confidence
I'm
of his ministers or something like that. Correct.
but sorry.
It was something about losing the confidence of his ministers or something like that.
Oh, I don't know. I think it came down to I think a decision of his own where he had left. I think he had made a comment about being booed at a baseball game. When you're booed at a baseball game, it's time to step out. He went to pitch, I think it was a Blue Jays game. I
Oh, I
honestly,
see.
I can't. I say I can't remember. I wasn't born during that time. I'd have to
Right.
go
Same.
check the CBC digital archives to
Right.
to
To know.
remember. But the idea is to leave them when you're looking good. Absolutely.
Yeah. But
You
you know
know.
what? I hearing interviews with Brian Mulroney now, I remember him talking about a lot of legislation that he was talking about. He brought forward a lot of legislation on, people with handicaps, on have the regulation on having elevators in buildings and having rails and having special Olympic programs and having all those things. It's like people don't really think about those things, but those are really big issues, and
Brian Mulroney's government. I mean, like he had a lot of very capable ministers. He had a lot of very energetic people. And honestly, at the time of his election, there's a reason it was such a landslide for the PCs. You know, the factors were there for a perfect storm to have that blue wave. But Brian Mulroney has a pretty socially progressive record. I mean, when we think of progressive conservatives in the 80s, generally speaking, we don't think of the conservatives that we see today for the most part. Certainly not the conservatives we see in Ottawa, in the federal wing of that party. And let's, not forget that Preston Manning and the birth of the Reform Party came out of discontent for the PCs under Brian Mulroney as being this party of Eastern Canada. The slogan "the West wants in" or whatever.
right.
Sure, there were undertones there that were taking square aim at the Liberals, but these people in Western Canada clearly didn't find a home in Brian Mulroney's PC party. So you know, Brian Mulroney did something right. Like his tenure as prime minister was not for naught. I mean, there was lots to take from it, lots of good, and he had one of the greenest or the greenest record of any prime minister in Canada.
Right. I
And he
remember him
brought
saying
lots
that.
of people came to Canada. Lots of immigrants came to Canada under Brian Mulroney. You know, I mean, I don't know if
Right.
I don't know if
It
we'd have that
seems
same steadfast approach with the current conservative government.
a
I
lot of
can't say for
times
sure.
the conservatives in Canada are more liberal than the even the Democrats in the United States. A lot of the time, Canada seems very progressive. Even the Conservative Party in Canada, agrees that Canada has a social safety net, and we have elements of socialism that they accept as a reality in Canada. So they're very conservative on certain issues, but realistically, comparative to the Americans, they're pretty soft.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, if we're talking about elected members, I mean, it's a mixed bag. If we're talking about members, again, it's a mixed bag. But I mean, there's a lot of thoughtfulness and points that are made from the Conservative Party in the same way from the New Democrats or from the Green Party or even the Bloc Québécois. I mean, uh, there is sobering advice offered, sobering alternatives offered, sobering points made. Do I think that it's comparable to the United States? I mean, in some ways, yes. You know, I think the conservatives and I think conservatives in Canada look to the United States and
Yeah.
see some inspiration. If I'm being quite honest, I
Right.
mean, we have a lot of rhetoric around gun culture in Canada, and I think it's bizarre. But that's perpetuated by American uh, politics and a strong effort, as you mentioned about lobbyists. Well, gun lobbying in the United States is uh, is a whole other rabbit hole to go down.
Well,
But
that issue is more of a rural versus urban kind of thing, because if you ask any Canadians that live in the bush or live not in a city, the chances are very high that they have a rifle somewhere in their house, because it's just part of the reality of the culture. And if you're going camping in the Yukon, it's probably best to have a rifle, because you might find a grizzly bear. And there's it's kind of the reality that it's a tool, and it's been used responsibly by adults. And Canada's regulations are pretty excessive, yet they're really useful, and they're reasonable, right? There's RCMP screening. You have to take a course. All sorts of things like that, right? You have to make sure that don't have a criminal record, or if your therapist thinks you're a threat or a danger to somebody, obviously you're put on a registry. The police get told that, and obviously you're not going to be given a license to purchase firearms in Canada. So Canada's policy on gun regulation seems pretty good. And obviously unlike America, we are not allowed concealed carry. You're not allowed automatic weapons. Obviously, there's no really reasons for a civilian to own an automatic weapon. Yet, a hunting rifle, or a marksmanship, you know, somebody that's training for the Olympics, these are law-abiding citizens. And most of the time, the guns that are used in crimes, they're not attained legally. So having those regulations doesn't really it doesn't even affect those criminally acquired guns, because they're gotten in the black market. So there's you know putting more and more regulations on gun owners. Obviously, it's not the solution at this point, because it's not where the criminal gun crimes come from.
well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I think, you know, I, as you know, grew up on a farm, and well, not a farm, on my family's farm, and I have been hunting since I could have a hunter's safety, which I think was at the age of 12. Before I came actually to Scotland, one of the last things I did was I went hunting. I went goose hunting. And anyways, it's all right. I enjoy it, I guess. Uh, and I say that because I have a strong rejection to gun culture becoming any more than what it is, and it's pretty bad in Canada in my mind's eye because uh, people think that the government is trying to take their guns away, and then people have this idea that their guns are part of their identity. Well, geez, that sounds an awful lot like people in the United States,
Right.
where they identify through their guns and their collection of their guns. And, I'd say over the last several years, watching in the news the amount of people that have been killed in Canada, in the United States, and elsewhere, in schools, in places of worship, it blows my mind, and a lot of these people are law abiding citizens. Some of them own their guns legitimately.
Right.
You mentioned about if you're talking to a mental health professional and they deem you as a threat, well, okay, you can't buy a gun. Well, that's good. But
Right.
does every person that could potentially be like a would be threat,
Right.
do they have access to a mental health assessment, an adequate mental health assessment from a administered by a mental health professional to determine like this person probably shouldn't own any firearms? No, no. And I mean, the reality is it's a pretty tall order to try and reach all those people.
Right.
But if you asked me, someone who knows his way around a shotgun and a rifle, and is a somewhat experienced hunter, how I feel, I think the regulations should be stronger. And the only guns that I've ever shot are the guns that have been held by family members before me. I used to think it was good to have more, but less is more, and then sometimes having none is just as fine too. I don't feel safer with a gun. I could go the rest of my life without shooting a gun, and I'd be
Right.
just fine too.
Well,
You know,
there's the real fact that statistics show that the fact just the by owning a gun in your household, the chances of you getting shot by a firearm go up exponentially, right? They're
sure,
statistically
there's a safety aspect to
right,
it. You could hurt yourself without trying to,
right,
just by handling a firearm.
right,
I mean,
exactly.
they are dangerous. Do I feel like and I've experienced that. I've literally had someone come in the yard, in my parents' yard, where I was in the house by myself, and they didn't see that there was someone home because there were no vehicles in the yard,
Hmm.
and I could see someone snooping around. And this wasn't that long ago. Some people would say, "Well, wouldn't you get the gun or whatever and like try scare the person?"
Right,
No, I didn't. I opened the door and shouted at the person, and they gave me some muffled BS excuse, got in their car, and left. And okay, I didn't recognize the person, and I'm sure they won't do that again.
right.
Great. But
You don't want
my
to elevate the
instinct,
situation by
no,
presenting
why would
danger,
like,
right?
I don't feel safer holding a gun.
Right.
That's the reality. I've
Because
never once
they
in
could
my life
pop out a
thought,
gun behind them, and then you're you're in that situation, unlike before where you diffuse the situation not using lethal force or anything like that.
yeah, I think we have a problem on that conversation. I think the government's taking the right steps. I think the government should be taking some more steps to, like, for example, do we need handguns? Does anyone need a handgun in Canada that isn't a police officer?
Yeah, and that's the problem with handguns is that usually I would say, well, people should be able to. It's not a semi-automatic, but is the thing is that unlike a rifle, a handgun is very easily concealable. You can have it on your waistband in your boot,
Well, but
so it's a
again,
big
I,
problem.
I've hunted deer. I've gone goose hunting. I've I've taken part in the seasonal hunting traditions that a lot of people take part in.
Right.
Handgun is pretty useless.
It's
I
pretty
don't think
useless.
anyone's going to be
It's
shooting a deer with a handgun. You
right.
know,
The
no one's
only
going
the
to need a
only
handgun and they're going
practicality,
camping.
like I know that in Canada, a lot of the time, I think for certain things that you have to give a pretty good reason to why you need a handgun, because I know some people that they were given a permit, a special permit, because they've been targeted by organized crime and by people like that, and the police have given them a permit and a permission, saying, you know, it's kind of it's the thing with the police is that in the British common law system and the American system. British common law system is, you know, uh, you cannot own a taser. You cannot defend yourself using violence. You cannot defend yourself. You can only hope that the police show up and save you, and that's kind of the standard our criminal code goes for. It's very, when you start in self defense, it gets really muddy, and you end up having to go to court and defend yourself, and pleading your case, right? If you do get in a serious problem using self defense, right? And in America, it's if you're on my property, in certain states, you can just shoot at people, and this is there's a big difference. But I feel like there is a point in saying, yes, it's true that when seconds matter, when somebody's trying to kill me, when seconds matter, the police will be there in minutes. And that's not very useful to me, being, somebody trying to hurt me. That's not very useful when they're minutes away, when seconds matter. So at a certain point, I understand the sentiment of I as a sovereign adult have the right to not get murdered. And so if somebody tries to harm me, I will do everything I can with any power that I have to make sure that my life is safe. And so I really resonate with that sentiment too. So I don't know where I stand really.
Yeah, and I think that's understandable, to still have, to not have a definitive uh, position on the topic, but we have to think, the most of the discussion that we've had, especially around U.S. politics, is how do we absorb that? How do we view that? What is our hot take on it all? Do we agree? Do we disagree? And the same can be said about gun culture. People have some very strong views about it. There are some very alarming views about what people think should be allowed in Canada, and in other places like the United States, which obviously has much more laxed gun laws than in Canada. But I mean, like I said, I don't feel safer with a gun, and I've used a gun for you know quite a few years, and partake in hunting and things like that. But if someone told me, Jamal, if you don't ever shoot your gun again, then you're gonna it'll reduce crime by X amount, by 50%, or it'll reduce gun violence completely, I would feel no sentiment towards those guns. I would say, be gone, get rid of them.
But
I
that's
mean,
that's not true though. That's not what's going to happen, because
no,
we're
I'm
just
talking in a hypothetical sense. I'm trying to
right.
illustrate that in my mind. I have no use for guns, really, despite all of my years of experience with guns and using them to hunt for big game like deer, or migratory birds like geese. Like, it just it's easier to live without them than to live with them.
But
And
they're
I think
they're
that
there,
describes guns perfectly. Guns invite more problems.
right? but
So
but since they're
how
there and we can't have a prohibition, it just like, if we ban liquor, liquor's still going to be there. It's just going to be handled by
oh,
the
oh,
criminals.
for sure. But I think having policy in place and rules in place that regulate and create a system of penalties for people that break rules will deter behavior. It might take some time, but I mean, should we be allowed to own handguns in Canada? Hell no. Should we be allowed to own? I forget, is it AR-14s or AR-15s, whatever the hell they are? They're basically assault rifles. They're not classified as assault rifles, but I'm sorry, you don't take those fucking things to go hunting deer.
Right.
They're useless. They have high firepower. Look, we've had people like this Quebec mosque shooter.
Right.
Quebec, Canada. We're not talking about a different country and a different continent. We're not talking about the United States. We're talking about right here, or well, I'm not there, but right there in Canada. You know, a young guy who probably could have had, you know, a very similar story to you and I, had he not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not the one assessing him. I think he's a pretty awful human being because he showed little remorse. Um, but again, he had access to a firearm in his home.
Mm-hmm.
And from my understanding, I don't want to say things that aren't true, but from my understanding, a legally obtained firearm.
Right.
You know, the same way the hunting rifle is a legally obtained firearm at my parents' house, or the shotgun.
But
But I've
I'm
only
pretty
ever
sure
shot
under the law
deer and birds with it.
it has to be locked away in a vault, right? It has to be
Yeah,
inaccessible
I
to
mean,
those without the permit.
yeah, we keep jewelry and fucking money in banks in vaults. People still break in.
Right, right.
They're there, right?
Well, how much safety is enough safety, and
Well, the
what's
safety aspect of it is by not having it, by not
right,
having it, or by having a lot less of it. By having an AR-14 or AR-15, whatever the model is, by having those things available to Canadians, that's ridiculous. Because if you really like shooting a gun that much, go to a fucking shooting range and go
right,
shoot guns there.
right,
Okay,
exactly.
want to have it in your home? Get out of here. You're not going to be safer with it. You're going to create more problems. You're going to end up shooting
Right.
someone, or yourself, or your family, unintentionally, whatever. See, I mean, it's I could talk about that from now till the cows come home because I know the firepower that exists behind those triggers, and it's not hard to see what damage a gun can do. And you know, when you recognize that, then you realize these things are worse to have than not to have. They invite more problems with their presence than their absence. And that's guns through and through. From a guy that, like you said about living in the bush, that came from the bush.
Right.
I can tell you that pretty plainly.
But some of those people they don't work in offices. They work in the bush. So they sometimes they do need it. They
Sure, I guess. I mean, I don't know who's working that far in the bush, but having a gun in certain applications, sure. An AR-15 or
well
a
like park
revolver,
rangers, I'm pretty sure they carry rifles if they're
sure,
in the
a park
parks, right?
ranger,
Right.
But I mean, I guess the thing is like, you know, I understand you're not going to completely deter someone from making a bad choice and
Right.
potentially hurting or causing fatalities among people.
Well, more
But
people die from car accidents, so should we regulate cars and driver's licenses more? If they're
no,
the
but the
cause
difference
for
between cars and guns is
cars
cars
are essential.
are rarely used as a means
Well, same thing
of
with guns. I argue it's not the norm that people use them to commit crimes with. It's the very
there's a
small
lot of gun owners that don't. You're right, but then
exact
a
and
lot
we
of crimes that exist with guns.
right.
A
But
lot of these
in that
guns they might be illegally obtained,
and in
but
that
a lot of firearms.
imperfect world, it seems that the only answer is the price of liberty is vigilance. So, you know, I guess there is no perfect solution to the gun
Well, no, but I
policy.
mean, if you live in downtown Toronto or Winnipeg
Right.
or Vancouver, you know, any of these cities, are you going to tell me that you need to own a handgun in your house or your condo or your apartment or your mom's basement?
Right. And that's a real concern, right? In big cities where there's big metropolis areas. That
Right.
makes
And it goes
sense.
back to what you said about it. It's a rural thing. So, okay, there's an argument there.
Right.
People in rural catchment areas, should they be allowed to have certain firearms? Sure. I'm sitting here saying that, you know, owning a rifle or a shotgun or a 22, I mean, that's a lot of firepower. And there are guns that have some use, albeit very limited, extremely limited.
So do you
But
think in Canada we should allow women to carry mace or tasers to protect themselves, for example?
well, I think the answer to that is I would rather we lived in a Canada where that wasn't an issue to be debated, where women
Well, of
didn't have
course.
to feel they had to carry those things. But I mean, that's a different topic. That is a whole different topic. I mean,
It's
women
less
do
less
carry things on them, or have in some cases,
Well, in
the
America it's legal. In Canada it's illegal. You're we're not
yeah,
allowed
but
to
but
use
as I was
mace. We're not
saying, like
allowed to
the
use
point I'm trying to
tasers,
make
right?
on that is it's fundamentally different, and where it's legal or not legal, women are still doing it, and it's
Exactly
because
the
of.
point, right? Uh,
But that is different, though.
Regulation isn't
They
going to
they have
save it.
a there is a very inherent need for them to protect themselves from would be assaulters,
Right.
uh,
Yet, and that's
whatever.
the thing, assault is illegal, yet people still do it. So, we can,
Yeah,
there's only so much we can do. It's illegal. If we catch you, then, that's that. But, at a certain point, we can't regulate, we can't have an over policed state in a
no,
way
we can't. But I mean, the government has a role to play in
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 public safety.
instituting changes that legislatively can make society a little bit safer. You're right. The government can't just put its beak into every household's business.
So
Can't.
the
It's
answer to
impossible.
me seems like it's more education and you know more education and more rigorous screening, and that should kind of that's kind of as much as we can do in that regard,
Well,
instead
no,
of
that's a good part of it. I think the other big part, though, is outright bans, and whether that means having a buyback system for people that own certain firearms, or deterring the sale of certain types of weapons, especially handguns, and basically the step below assault rifles, whatever these AR-14s are, that are pretty useless in the hunting context. Which I can't. If you're not hunting, what the hell do you need a gun for?
right.
You know. So I think there's a few extra steps that could be taken, but the problem is, people view what the government is trying to do with gun laws in Canada as a rebirth of the long gun registry or something, which the long gun registry was a pretty big fail on the Liberals' part, an administrative fail that cost millions upon millions of dollars and didn't really do much. The theory of it made sense. The practice of it was pretty well an absolute fail. But the Trudeau government is not recreating the long gun registry. I mean, they have some pretty expert people, like the former chief of Toronto Police, Minister Blair, uh, in the throes of those conversations about the damage that firearms can do and have done and continue to do.
Right. It's interesting because in Britain they've done a lot of that kind of policy, and it's reduced the amount of gun crimes, but then it exponentially grew the amount of knife crimes. So, you know, I mean, not that that's worse or better; it's still terrible, but is that's kind of where Britain's situation on the issue is, and it's kind of an unfortunate one.
Well, I mean, if I guess there's no such thing as a one size fits all,
Right.
but would a country like Britain be better off without making those changes? I mean, making the access to guns slightly easier, there likely would be a positive correlation with an increase in gun crime. So as a result, you know, would be uh, attackers are using knives. I mean, it's just as bad in lots of ways, but it's still not a gun. I mean, if I'm here in my flat and I'm looking down my window and some guy's threatening me and he pulls out a knife,
Not as
I'm going to
threatening.
still be
Yeah.
pretty friggin' scared, but he can't really do much to me. He can't
Right.
shoot me through my window. He can't throw that knife. And so criminals are still going to be criminals.
Right.
But if a criminal is holding a knife and, you know, holding a knife because they can't hold a gun, it's pretty rich for me to say, but that's probably a better situation in that sense.
You can, it's kind of gruesome to think about, but they can do a lot less mass damage than an AR-15, like you were saying. And to that point where
Yeah.
they can injure or kill dozens, if not hundreds of people, as opposed to, yeah, a knife where you could probably stab maybe five people before somebody they all jump on you. Realistically, how many people? So like that's very true, like you were saying. So, I mean, it seems that it's to me it seems like I don't want the population to be infantilized into saying you're not responsible enough to be gun owners. You're not responsible enough to make these adult decisions. So we're going to take away things that are not rights. They're privileges in Canada. A gun. There's no gun rights in Canada. It is a privilege, like driving is a privilege. It's not a right. Uh, it seems as though that for me, you know, coming from, like, I was in Army cadets, coming from that kind of background where we were taught responsible citizenship, and being the instituted the mentality of the police and the military, when there's like in France, when they're standing in the airport with their machine guns, they're not there to threaten the public. They're not there to threaten me as a person, as a citizen. They're there to protect me. And that's why you have different kind of views on firearms and how people feel about them, how it's uncomfortable for people to see firearms in peacetime and in peace environments. Yet in France, at when you go to Paris, you see people with machine guns and soldiers. Yet it's kind of it depends on the attitude you have towards them. you know and for me, the attitude towards them is, oh, they're there just in case that something goes wrong and there's an attack. They're there to protect us, and so I can rest easy knowing that there's these people looking out for my best interest, as opposed to other people that look at them and say, look, they're the threat. They're imposing fear and that kind of totalitarian vibe with having soldiers around, right? So it seems that there's different aspects and different motivations to or different perspective affect how we see guns, right?
Yeah, and the application of them. I
Right.
mean,
And
that
so,
gun that I used to go hunting with over a month ago before I came to Scotland, you know, if I'm home in the fall, I might use it again, and in the fall, as in next fall, which
right.
well, I guess technically wouldn't fall under the fall months, but at least the beginning of fall weather. Uh, or I guess no, technically it would fall under fall, but anyways, that would be the only time I'd use it. I mean, I shouldn't say the only time. I mean, maybe if there was a bear right at my parents' door, I might have to, go and shoot it. But I live like I realize I can't speak for everyone, but where I live, it's a heavily wooded area, and it's right beside a river. Um, I think one year, I mean, I've seen coyotes and I've seen timber wolves, and one time I shot at a timber wolf. I mean, I could probably, well, I've had to shoot at predators a few times, but not too many times. I haven't
Right.
had a bear at my doorstep, and I never went to get the gun in a gleeful kind of way to use it neither.
Right. That,
So
yeah, it's never a good day when you have to use it in those kinds of circumstances. It's not a
no, and I mean, it just goes back to what I said. Like, there's no part of me that feels safer with a gun in my hands. It's the opposite. and it's always going to be that way. I mean, and this is someone you're talking to someone that again has some experience with handling a firearm.
Right.
You know,
I guess the Americans have a lot bigger of a problem in that regard, and hearing kind of all the mass shootings, kind of like and the failures, every key failure of the system not catching those circumstances, right? Like in America, there's a lot of schools that have dedicated police officers or protection officers in the schools that are hired specifically for when these kinds of mass shootings happen. And then a lot of times they have been ill equipped, or they fall short and fail in what their
in their
mandate
efforts to
was.
protect, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they have a lot of police officers that are stationed at the schools in event of shootings in schools and things like. Yet, and a lot of times, those police officers, they're not really police officers; they're peace officers. They've failed in their mandate to actually do something. Where in the moment of battle, when it's going on, they retreat and they form a perimeter, while unarmed teachers run in and try to protect the kids and get shot in the process. And then you see the complete failure of those officers standing down or being cowards, where it becomes a huge problem, where we say, well, what is the solution? Is it to have police officers in the school? Well, it seems that they are not trained, and they're not trained for that kind of response. And a lot
Well, but
some of the
okay, they're
gun
not trained for that
lobbyists.
kind of response. But then, like, is a police officer, is there training? Like when I think about school, when I think about kindergarten to grade 12, when I think about university, which I'm in university right now, um, even as fucked up as a lot of the things that are happening, I still don't think, like, my primary concern is, well, holy shit, I wonder how we're going to deal with the day if someone brings out a gun into my lecture, because that's not what school is about. And police officers, I mean, or peace officers, whoever is designated, I mean, the fact that we even have to have people in a primary education setting is devastating. It's a
Right.
pretty awful reality. Um, but also, these peace officers, just like these police officers, I mean, are they expecting a kid to come to school with a machine gun or whatever, or two handguns and a pocket full of knives or something like?
Right. it's
No,
it's a
no.
failure to address bullying at the source, instead of it
Bullying
amounting to
or
that
whatever it is. I
extremism.
mean,
Or yeah,
it's
right.
it goes back to having, excuse me, good sound infrastructure, social infrastructure to help people
Right.
that are experiencing a crisis.
If you don't feel like you're being left out or isolated, you'll feel that love, and yeah, that'll deter.
Yeah, so do we spend more money on the police? Do we spend more money on guns fighting guns? Or do we spend money on
Right.
having professionals in public settings accessible to those that might not be able to afford it to get the help they need? I
Right.
mean, I'm on the side of that, on the latter, that we should probably have those things in place. We should probably have the right social infrastructure in place. We should probably make sure that kids that are dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with, young adults, I mean, whatever a person is going through.
And this kind of makes me think about, it goes back to the Nixon policies that have criminalized a lot of Americans, and uh, the criminalization of drugs, where it it criminalized minorities in underdeveloped areas, and it affected people, in that way, where it, we have, so many people in America, where is it 1 in 10 Americans are in prison right now, and it's basically a prison state where they've basically criminalized human beings, and their drug use or whatever kind of things they're doing in that regard, and it completely affected an entire generation of Americans, and that you know the recidivism of criminality came from that. So out of that racist policy from Nixon, where it led to the destruction of a lot of American families and minority families in America. So this is a real impact of that kind of we're going to criminalize people instead of educating people, or using different kind of social aspect of saying these people need help. There's a lack of something in this community. There's poverty. Instead of doing it at that level, they say as soon as they commit a crime, incarcerate them, and that's how we're going to deal with poverty, and which has been the wrong poverty, or the wrong policy to have. And hopefully we'll move away from those kinds of policies, and we'll
Yeah, the
legalize
reality is
psychedelics.
throwing people in jail, being trigger happy to do that, as opposed to having infrastructure outside of the jail setting to prevent these things from happening in the first place, is a pretty proven method that I think I think it is catching on. I mean, it seems like it moves at a snail's pace, but
Well, just like
but
Biden and Kamala, they've promised to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. And a lot of states, I think Oregon and a few other states, have completely decriminalized psychedelics. So there are incremental changes that are starting in America, and in Canada too.
yeah, no, I mean, these are the things that that will make some difference, right? I mean, we can't just go around creating fines and penalties for behavior that either needs addressing outside of a prison setting, or is just literally not harming anyone. Like, I
Right.
mean, I think weed should have been
What's
probably
more
decriminalized a
detrimental,
while ago.
a teenager smoking a joint, or the police officer giving him a criminal record, thus ruining his career and any chances of a higher education, or any chances of any kind of career success outside of working at Dairy Queens, right? Like,
Right.
it ruins somebody's life when you make them a criminal because of a substance they're smoking, and especially that it's not harming anyone. It's very perverse to criminalize it.
No, and I think I think we're slowly realizing. I think all it's almost on every end of the political spectrum where they're acknowledging that this is you know probably not the best place to focus efforts in terms of creating a culture of criminalization on things that don't really harm, but of course not making it a free for all, but having it in the case of marijuana, having it regulated, I think is probably a good step. I don't think there's been a lot of evidence, if any, in Canada that would suggest that that was a bad move, that that's created more problems.
Well,
I
much
think it's
like
probably
the
quite the opposite. Not probably, it is quite the
right,
opposite.
and just like the culture in Europe of the alcohol culture, right? It's been normalized that teenagers would drink wine at the table with their parents, thus making it less of an abused substance. Where in America, and in Canada, you can't drink till 21 or 18, and so it's demonized and criminalized if you're a minor drinking. So it
Just
becomes this thing where oh, I can't do it, then I have to do it because it becomes the rebellious nature, right? And then you excessively over abuse it, or you abuse the substance, instead of it being oh, I'm gonna have a glass of wine with my supper tonight. Instead of it being that, it's becoming, I'm gonna drink this whole bottle of vodka and I'm gonna pass out, and I'm happy about that. It's like, why is that a good thing? Harming your organs like that. Why is that a culturally cool thing to do now, right? In America.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, education on these kinds of things and having checks and balances, not making it a free for all, and not making it a thing where it's a completely taboo topic or something like that, where it shouldn't be happening. I mean, it's going to happen regardless. And it's how we allow it to happen. If we make it happen and allow it to happen in such a way that people have to do it in secrecy and potentially breaking the law, or out in the open, regulated, and naturally as a result quite a bit safer. I think I would choose that option.
Right. And that's the thing. Once when society tells you for, smoking pot or doing something like that that you're a criminal essentially, it creates a kind of counterculture where you feel like an outsider and you feel like, you're living in the closet, you're not allowed to express yourself and you're not allowed to be who you are without being persecuted for your choices or for what drugs you use. Because let's be honest, if everybody's got their drugs of choices. I can't name one person who doesn't have a drug of. It's either coffee, alcohol, or it's watching 12 hours of television a day. Every single person has a thing that their habits form where you're just addicted to it. It's either video games, you could be addicted to food, right? So it's the whole thing where of course certain addictions are a lot worse than you. If you're addicted to working out, that's probably a good addiction to have as opposed to an addiction to a substance, right? So it's all about the habit forming and maybe forming out of those habits and having that counterculture being accepted as saying these are not pot smokers outside of being pot smokers. To me, the hippies are the most law-abiding citizens of all. They're mostly the ones that would vote progressive. They vote for openness and for love, and so it's ironic that those are the they've criminalized hippies and those kinds of people, which seem to me as the least criminal kind of people and the most law-abiding citizens, more than the the other kind of groups in society, right? So it's ironic to me. It's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think different different segments of society are viewed differently, and as a result, they're treated they're treated in different ways. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly um, wrong with having good positive messages, and I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with keeping public safety at the forefront of decision making. And it took us a long time to realize that um, marijuana is not the gateway drug to hard drugs
Right.
and a
The
life
gateway drug
and
is
a life
your
of
habits, is the
misery. But
personality.
sorry.
The gateway drug is whether it's in your personality to have to be addicted to things or
Well,
you're
I
not.
mean, there are factors beyond that. I mean, a person's living situation, if they're
Oh yeah, of
experiencing
course.
homelessness and other aspects that weigh quite heavy. But what I'm saying is, like, to your point that, yeah, people, certain legislators and people in society have reacted quite poorly towards the legalization of certain things, like marijuana. They're on the wrong side of history on it, because it doesn't actually open the floodgates to make things worse. It does have the potential to be bad, like anything else in excess.
Right.
But
It's not the
why
boogeyman
it's
that's
regulated.
been
That's
put out
why
to be.
that's why you can only buy a certain amount at a certain time. That's
Right.
why there's quite a lot of education from a public health perspective on the consumption of marijuana, just like with alcohol.
Right.
I mean, it's not going to be the demise of a person necessarily.
And I guess it's there's the stigma that goes with it, where you know somebody who's a pot smoker is by default impossible to be successful, or they're just labeled as losers for their consumption, and saying that they can't amount to anything because of their consumption of this drug. Yet, I don't, Steve Jobs, Michael Phelps, all sorts of professionals have come out and open and saying, yes, I've smoked pot, yes, I've done LSD, look at me, I'm not some loser cave dweller, I'm a progressive, you know uh, member of society that provides and that is contributing, and is being impactful to society. And it's the stigma of, that's kind of a stigma that is long lasting from the Nixon policies that came out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slowly evolving topic of, I guess, perception. Not someone smoking a joint is necessarily going to equate to some sort of unambitious person that's incapable of having hopes, wants, and dreams and accomplishing them. So we're moving away from that. I mean, at a slower rate than I think a lot of us would have liked, but we're still moving away from it all the same. But it's like you said too. I mean, with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, will that discussion change in the United States? I mean, they're a pretty centrist pair on the political spectrum, but they're not right of center. They're not Donald Trump and Mike Pence. So
Right. They seem more open to the idea, right? They already policy. They're open to decriminalizing marijuana. So, at what point, will that come to
how
fruition?
far will
And
they take it? And yeah, what will it,
right,
when or if and
will
when
there
will
be
it
pardons? And
come to fruition? Is it remains to be seen. I mean, they haven't even had their swearing in
right,
ceremony yet, so I mean, we'll wait and see. But I think it will be different than what we've seen. So at least in the last 4 years, which is great, which is a positive thing, you know.
right.
But on a less positive note, I have to start studying soon because now I've been this return student. I
Yes.
don't know why. I don't know why I sometimes I don't know why I decided to go back to school when I realized how much I have to stay up, and I'm not staying up and actually having a good time. I'm staying up and reading these fucking books.
A lot of reading, and especially in law,
Books
it's a
that I
lot
don't
of
even
reading.
understand half the time.
Well, do you have to even do common? Do you have to do le code civil at all, or I'm assuming not, since you're in Scotland, right?
Sorry, do which?
You don't have to do the Quebec or French system of their civil code, right? You only have to practice or study
Yeah,
common
that's
law
right. That's right. I mean, if I wanted to practice
in
in
Quebec.
Quebec,
You'd have to do
it,
the code civil, but realistically, there's lots of opportunities outside of Quebec for lawyers, anyways. So, I mean,
well,
you know,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty saturated market. I
well,
don't
it's
even want to think about
saturated,
that. I just want to get through my
but
assignments and exams.
once you have the degree, it's kind of like you don't need to go in law necessarily. You can use it in a lot of
No,
applications, right? That's the good part
and,
about it.
and I have lots of friends that have law degrees and wrote the bar and
And don't
are
practice.
licensed to practice, but have found fulfillment in other areas.
Right, right.
But has their law degree come in handy? Absolutely.
And yeah, that's the point. It still has value. Even not in a
I think any
courtroom, right?
education is going to have value if you're happy doing it and you have a ability to learn some of it along the way.
Right.
I'm saying that as I very nervously shake my legs, realizing that
You
I,
have less
I
than
have
time.
I have like 300 pages to read this week, an assignment due.
Okay.
I'm doing my first practice mooting or whatever. My mooting partner and I have a case to present this week, so
Okay.
it's
So I guess I won't hold you much longer then. I'll let you get back to studying for your exams and stuff.
Yeah,
So, um,
yeah, the old man has to get back to his books.
right, right. Well, same here. I have an exam into a midterm and then a paper due in December. I'm only taking a couple of courses right now, thank God, because a full course load. I'm so done with school that a full course load seems like a nightmare to me.
You know what? I
So,
mean, it's good to have these things outside of university, like a podcast where you're able to talk about the issues of the day and not have to be so plugged into excuse me to just university and books and studying.
right, right. And we'll hopefully, we'll keep this going, one podcast a week. So, you're always welcome to come on. I'll always love talking politics with you. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
oh for sure. I'm happy to be on. I mean, we'll see. There's always a lot going on, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Well, I'm sure just as a recap, I'll be watching to see how Trump reacts. I don't think he's going to go quietly, but at this rate, it almost doesn't matter because we know he's going. That's the main.
what if he just leaves and goes dark? He goes silent, never tweets ever again. That would be more impressive than
That would be great. I might actually give him some credit there if he does
he just I'm going to Barbados. Phone drop.
that.
That's it.
Working on that orange tan, yeah.
I'm gonna go get a real tan. No more fake tan. Well, at 70, I don't know why you'd still want to be involved in the nightmare of politics at 70, unless you really feel the need
Oh, Joe
to.
Biden is 77, so
Oh
I
my
mean,
goodness! Oh
yeah,
my goodness!
it's a lot to take on at any time, but especially
It seems that it takes that long to get political capital to actually to even try to run, except for like exceptions, of course, like Obama. How young was Obama? 44, 42 when he ran for president. So
I don't know. He
around 40, early 40s. So I mean, it's quite a wild ride. So I'm gonna thank you again for coming on the show. It's unfortunate that the nature of the Zoom podcast world, but it is what
Hey,
it
you know
is.
what? This is good. This is still good.
Right.
Connection great, and I mean, it's
We
still all
haven't
the
had
same.
any technical issues so far, so that's a plus.
Perfect, man.
Right.
Well, okay, brother.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Every episode every Tuesday, and Patreon episodes every week. Thank you so much, and I'm your host Dominic Persicino, and enjoy the weekend. All right, I'll see you around. Take care. Bye bye.